Good evening, everyone. We will get started in just a minute. We still got lots of folks coming in. Thank you for joining us. Para los que hablan español, la junta empezará en un momento. Estamos esperando a que lleguen más familias. Y para los que hablan español también, esa junta está sido traduciendo en vivo en español. En su pantalla pueden escoger el globo y escoger interpretación en español. Y Mariana Rivarola está traduciendo en otro canal.
Could I jump in? Just we have a lot of questions, and I'll just answer one live before we start. A lot of people are wondering if they can talk or why don't we see other people. There's about 880 people in this webinar. You will only see the three panelists, which you see now, and we will see. We probably are going to have only time to answer the questions that are posted in the chat, because 890 people will be a lot of people to open the mic for.
Yeah, and on that, the chat is actually closed. We're using the Q&A feature, question answer. So as we go through the meeting, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We may answer them throughout the presentation. Jason is going to be helping answer some of those live. Once he posts an answer, all participants will be able to see both the question and the answer. And then the presentation will probably go pretty quickly, and then we will leave a lot of time to answer your questions. For the elementary webinar we held a month ago, we stayed on for at least an hour afterwards and answered over 150 questions. So we're here to answer as many questions as we can. And just so everyone knows, we do have 1,000 participant limit, and we're getting closer to it. So if for whatever reason folks can't get on, this is being recorded and will be posted, so others can have access to it.
And many people are wondering, like, are your mics on and is your camera on? No, your mics are off and your camera is not on unless we promote you, and you'll get fair warning if we happen to do that. So no one's watching you.
Right, so we can't see you or hear you. You can see us and hopefully hear us because we have our mics on. So I'm going to do introductions real quick. So I am Cliff DeGraw, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. And with me is the Director of Educational Services, Jason Sutter. He's going to be answering the Q&A as we go through the meeting, and then we'll get to questions at the end, and he'll kind of help moderate as we go through. Mariana Rivarola is translating the meeting live, and the meeting is being recorded and will be shared with all families tomorrow and posted on our website. So real quick before we get going, let me do my Spanish introduction information first. Buenas noches a todos. Yo soy Cliff DeGraw, el asistente al superintendente de servicios educativos, y conmigo es el director de servicios educativos, Jason Sutter. Gracias por venir esta noche a aprender más de nuestros planes. Y si quieren escuchar a la Junta en español, pueden escoger la traducción en vivo al escoger el globo en su pantalla. Gracias por venir. All right, let's get going. So just a little bit about how we're going to organize tonight's presentation. So there are a few ways we've organized this. One, we're first going to jump right into what the hybrid schedule looks like, what we have planned, what your options are. We're then going to go through what a day in the life looks like for a student, from home to campus, at campus, and then back home. Just what exactly does it look like? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the reopening plans that the board has set. As of a month ago, when we did this for elementary, there were some criteria for reopening. That criteria has been amended, and there's some specific dates involved. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then we're going to go over the survey that we're going to be sending out tomorrow to all secondary families, and asking them to share with us their preference of the two learning options that will remain. So when we talk about hybrid schedule, what we're talking about is a combination of both in-person and distance learning. It's not all in-person and it's not all distance learning as it has been right now. It is a combo. So the way it's going to work for secondary is, as we survey families, if it's anything like the elementary survey, we know that not everyone will choose to come back for in-person learning, and that's okay. Families and students can opt to continue in distance learning only from home. And we're going to survey families to figure out what their preference is. Based on those results, we estimate that the number of students and families that do choose to come back will be able to split into two different groups. And those groups will come onto campus in an alternating fashion so that we can keep each group distanced and safe. And then there will be an option for distance learning only, and that is included in our schedule. So we're calling these Team 1 and Team 2, just for clarity. So what does the schedule look like? So in a typical week, kind of big picture here, Team 1 students, and those have not been identified yet, but Team 1 students will come on campus on Mondays and Thursdays every week for 3 classes. And then Team 2 students will come on campus Tuesdays and Fridays for their 3 classes. And then Wednesdays, all Wednesdays, once we switch into hybrid, will be synchronous distance learning from home. So the same thing that we're doing right now, that will continue on Wednesdays. So both teams together virtually. On a daily basis, we do sanitizing and disinfecting in the evening after school, as well as other cleaning protocols. So the days that students are not on campus, so for example, on Mondays and Thursdays, Team 2 students will join their classmates at the same time via Zoom, virtually from home. And on Tuesdays and Fridays, the opposite happens. Team 1 students are at home, and the distance learning only students all join at the same time, virtually. So there'll be 1 group in person, 2 groups joining virtually from home. So let's look at it a little more in detail. For example, for A days, this is what the schedule would look like. 0 period meets on days that we have A days. So the days that first, second, and third meet, 0 period also meets. So when we're going through A day schedules, it looks like this. So everyone has first, second, and third.
Hey, Cliff, sorry to interrupt, but I don't think, is Mariana set up in interpretation? People are saying there's no interpretation button. I don't think we started it.
I believe I did. Let me double check.
Sorry for the interruption.
Actually, let me unshare. Okay, let's see. Yeah, it is started. You do have to choose. Si quieren escuchar la traducción, tienen que escoger español del globo. Hay un globo que dice interpretación y tienen que escoger español para escuchar al canal en español.
Okay, thanks, Cliff.
No worries. Let me check.
Somebody in the chat said that they tried it and it worked. So thank you for.
All right, you do have to choose the Spanish channel on a little globe to get to the Spanish. Okay, so in this case, we've got our 2 teams coming on campus 2 days a week, and distance learning 3 days a week. And on Wednesday, again, all students are distance learning. 0 period is always distance learning. It's not on campus. We're going to get into this in just a minute, but the guidance from Sonoma County Public Health is to limit the number of groups that a student pertains to. And in this case, the guidance is 3 academic groups at most and 1 extracurricular group. So we specifically asked about this morning, if 0 period, what to do with that. And the guidance was that that would make 4 stable groups that a student would be part of, and that doesn't meet the guidance. So 0 period will be distance learning all the time. What B days would look like, and we'll get into the rotation in just a minute. You're probably wondering. On B days, right? B days are periods 4, 5, and 6. So again, 2 groups on campus, 1 group on campus 2 days a week, the other 2 days of the week, and then Wednesdays are synchronous distance learning from home. And the schedule looks like this. So let me expound a little bit more on the stable groups. So the guidance from the county is that students at the most can belong to 3 different stable groups in the secondary levels and 1 extracurricular group. So that limited, it clearly limits our options. As a committee, we've been working for months on all types of options, on options with 1 class at a time, options with 2 classes at a time, 3 classes at a time, and our current 6 class at a time schedule. We looked at those through the lens of safety for students and staff, through educational quality, and through the mental health and well-being of students and staff. And we're kind of going on our own for a while. The state put out some updated guidance on January 14th, which directed our plans and changed them a little bit. And then this is very fluid. We had a meeting yesterday as our planning group and thought we had finalized on a schedule, only to learn this morning that County Public Health shared out this additional guidance, which limited our plan. So we're literally turning on a dime, and we had a different plan ready to go and had to adjust that today. So the guidance from the county is not only are students limited to 3 academic stable groups, but that stable groups have to remain together for at least 3 weeks. So thus, the return table for secondary is Monday, April 19th, and that is assuming we're in the red tier. That leaves us 7 weeks of school. So the nice even break is 3.5 weeks of A days, followed by 3.5 weeks of B days. So again, those 3 stable groups have to stay together for at least 3 weeks. So our group put this together, felt like this made the most sense, that met the guidance. So this is what it will look like if we're in the red and able to open on April 19th, or reopen. Students will come in this order, and then on May 10th and 11th, those will be finals. On May 12th, that Wednesday, that's when we will switch from A days to B days. So April 12th will be a B day, but it will be distance learning for all. And on May 13th, that's when the first on-campus B days begin. So from May 13th through June 2nd, and then we have B day finals. So it's 3.5 weeks of A days, followed by 3.5 weeks of B days. And what does the bell schedule look like? This should look familiar. This schedule is almost exactly the same as our distance learning bell schedule. There is one difference. 0 period has been moved forward just a little bit. And this is to allow our students who have 0 period some additional time after 0 period ends to make it to school. So there's a 30-minute gap between the end of 0 period and first period. And again, that only occurs on A days. So from April 19th through May 11th, that's when zero period meets along with those other classes. And as far as our instructional minutes, we're still bound by 240 instructional minutes a day. So 3 classes of 60 minutes means that our students still need an additional 20 minutes per class of asynchronous work out of the instructional day, which is the same as it is now for distance learning. So students can meet their 240 minutes in that manner. So a day in the life, what does it look like for a student in a hybrid schedule? So for those coming on campus, there will be a daily symptom and exposure screening. There will be a reminder sent out every morning at a certain time from Parent Square, which includes a symptom and exposure screening questionnaire. And families need to conduct this symptom and exposure screening every day before students come to school, and ensure that their students do not have COVID-19 symptoms or have been exposed to someone with COVID symptoms or COVID positive. For those that don't conduct the survey or the screening at home, there will be an opportunity to do it at school. But this happens every day, both students and staff. Siblings, we will be working with the survey results to make sure that siblings are on the same learning team so that it's easier for families who are transporting secondary students to do it on the same days. And obviously the big change from what we're used to in the past is masks are required to be worn all day at school, both students and staff. And they do have to be greater than 2 ply, so 2 or 3 ply. You cannot wear a bandana. You cannot use a neck gaiter. It has to be an appropriate mask. And the big thing here we want to make sure everyone understands is school obviously will look different. There will be fewer students at school at one time. And even how we arrive, how we leave, and how we move around campus will be different. So schools will be maximizing their entrances and exits so that we can spread out as many kids as possible. So we're not, bottlenecking in an area or congregating or, getting closer than 6 feet. Student traffic flow around campus will be monitored. So students will travel down the right-hand side of hallways and corridors and only take a left turn against traffic if you're going into a classroom. But again, socially distant, at least 6 feet, no large gatherings, and safely walking through campus. Obviously, hand washing and sanitizing is important. There will be additional hand washing stations located throughout all of the campuses, in addition to those in the bathrooms and in some classrooms. And this is one of those habits we're going to reinforce and encourage kids to continually wash their hands if they use the restroom, if they, in PE, if they're using any shared equipment or balls or, things like that, obviously to wash their hands every time after that, wash your hands after eating or drinking or snacking. This is just an example of what arrival and departure may look like. So this is Kenilworth Junior High. This is just an example. There are several ways to get onto Kenilworth's campus. Maybe in the past, they've been limited and students were kind of funneled to a certain couple of entrances. Well, now we're going to maximize the space. So how it's going to work for secondary is based off of your first class of the day, depending on what room you're in, depending on what wing you're in. We're going to guide you to a certain entrance to come on that entrance in a staggered way so that we're not encroaching on other space and that we're doing it safely. And then depending on what your last class of the day is, it goes in reverse. It's like an evacuation map, or it's like this map in reverse. So you would exit a certain way. Obviously at the high schools, this looks a little different. If you drive to campus, if you're in the student parking lot, clearly at some point you have to end up back at your car. But the goal here is we're trying to minimize students who are crossing paths, who are mixing. So each site is going to have their own map. These will be in their safety plans. And so be on the lookout from your school site. They'll have specific directions about when students arrive on campus and how they get to their classrooms. in a safe way. So one of the other things that will be different is the classroom clearly. So all student desks will be at least 6 feet apart. Teachers will be teaching from, their teaching space. For a lot of classrooms, that's the front, and some it's the side. But teachers will be also at least 6 feet away from students. Again, everyone will be wearing a mask. We have MERV 13 air filtration systems at our schools, which are high quality air filtration. We have, in addition, placed Apache Aero Light air filtration scrubbers that are in the classrooms, and they scrub the air 3 times in an hour. So that's just an additional safety precaution we put in all the classrooms. And shared workspaces and materials is limited and will look different. Clearly, things like group work will look a lot different. Students won't be all congregating around the same space, around the same table like they have in the past. So what does the classroom look like? Well, for some of you 7th graders, maybe some of you freshmen who have not been on your campus at all, this is what the classrooms look like. This is an example from Petaluma High. And in this class, they have tables, not individual desks. So the way, for example, one way to set this room up is we've X'd off in blue, if you can see, certain spaces. So students would be sitting at least 6 feet away and diagonally. Tables like this in the back could be used with students on either side. They're at least 6 feet away. In some of these cases, if it's closer than 6 feet, there might be a partition put on the table. As you can see in the back, this table in the middle is going to be unused because it's too close to the others being used around it. It's not 6 feet away. Again, this back table back here is also not being used. This table right here in the front, it could be used. This seat right here is 6 feet from all of the others being used, but that's the only seat that could be used. So it's going to depend on the classroom configuration. It'll depend on the furniture. But you can imagine students sitting in these spaces and they're spaced out and it's different. And students will be, facing the same direction, and the teacher, again, 6 feet from them. So outside of the classroom will look different. So picture your school, picture your hallways, your corridors. Picture a typical secondary school. You've got groups of students congregating all over campus. And now that's going to be different. So there's going to be fewer opportunities outside of the classroom as it is. So students will remain socially distanced on campus, especially before school, after school, and in between classes. For passing time, there is a 15-minute passing period. Students will be expected to, be distant and safely walk to their next class and not congregate with others, especially not closer than 6 feet. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're using right-of-way traffic, so students travel on the right-hand side to avoid mixing and crossing paths with other students. Some of the other things that will be in place when returning to school, we do have protocols following the guidance from the county and the state on how to respond to symptoms. So if students develop one or more COVID-19 symptoms while at school, there's a process in place. Each school has an isolation area that has been identified, and there's a protocol and a process for how we handle those. Families, parents will be called if a student is exhibiting one or more symptoms and is sent to the isolation room. They'll be monitored while parents come to pick up their students, and then we will request that the student be tested. And there will be testing options provided by the district as well as your own healthcare provider. We are and will be working with our great nursing team to respond appropriately. We have nurses. We don't have individual nurses for every school site, but we do have nurses that have a caseload of several school sites, and they will be part of our plan. And again, we're following the guidance from the state. And this guidance that came out on January 14th, there's been a few things that have been updated since then. So we are keeping ourselves abreast of all of those changes, and we'll adjust accordingly. At the end of the hybrid in-person school day, again, it looks a little different. So there will be no meals served on campus. All meals will be provided in a grab and go fashion. And we will be serving meals for all students, so not just those who typically have free and reduced lunch. That program has been extended for the year to provide lunch for all students. So we will be providing a lunch and a breakfast for the next day, every school day that they're there. And then depending on if it's the Thursday or Friday, students will also get meals for the weekend. But those will all be grab and go. Students will not remain on campus to eat. They will take those home. As we mentioned earlier, as we leave school, that again will look a little different, following kind of a reverse evacuation map off campus. And again, there will be additional work outside of school in addition to the in-class instruction. And I'm going to pause here real quick and turn off my alarm that keeps beeping.
So while Cliff's gone, there was a question that's come up, and I've answered it a couple of times, but I know it's a lot of people's questions about zero period. And that is one, we know that there's not a lot of time to transition between distance learning zero period and getting to class if you're in person. So that's something that we are working on. Again, as Cliff mentioned, some of these changes just came about today. So figuring out some adjustments that will need to happen. And luckily we have some time before we move to hybrid to figure that out. And we will let all those students and families that have zero period know how we're going to address that.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Sorry, that was the every time someone goes in and out of the garage door, that thing beeps. So apparently the kids are having fun going in and out of the house. All right, so cleaning protocols. Clearly, cleaning is a very important part of coming back on campus during a pandemic. We do have schedules in place where our custodial staff will be doing what we call a deep cleaning or sanitizing or disinfecting every day. We use an electrostatic sprayer, and it looks just like this. This is Carlos, who works at CASA. There's a fine mist that gets sprayed, and it lands on the surface and dries. This happens on a daily basis. Custodians will also throughout the day be wiping and spraying high touch surface areas, doorknobs, light switches, things like that. There will be alcohol wipes in every classroom and in PE areas for students to be able to wipe down their desk when they come to class, or wipe down their exercise equipment in PE before and after use. Clearly, there will be more frequent cleanings of the bathrooms, including the electrostatic spraying, in addition to our other cleaning protocols. So there's a whole plan in place for making sure that our schools and our surfaces are as clean as possible. All right, so let's talk reopening a little bit here. So if you are up on the latest board actions, last week the board amended the reopening resolution to include specific dates. So before, teachers receiving access to the vaccine series was one of the criteria that was removed, and specific dates were put in place. So while vaccinations are still happening, many of our teachers will have had the opportunity to be vaccinated before we open, but not necessarily all of them, and not necessarily secondary. They may have access to one of the vaccines by then. But regardless, the board has set the opening date of April 19th. So that is a Monday, but that depends on the county being in the red tier. Currently, we're still in the purple tier. We have to get below 7 cases a day per 100,000 residents to get into the red. So we're hoping, it's been trending in that direction. So we're hoping that we will be in the red and be able to open then. We are opening campuses a week prior on April 12th, specifically for secondary ELD classes for support, and for some of our special day class and South County special education students. So there will be more information coming about that and what that will look like for the week of the 12th. But for the rest of secondary, we remain in distance learning through the week of April the 12th, and April 19th would be our first date back on campus for that first learning team, which will be identified and communicated well ahead of then. But that's our target date. Some things you should know, those students that are currently being supported in our distance learning centers, once we reach the 19th, the distance learning centers will close as we need those spaces back for our classes on campus. For students who receive transportation, special education transportation, that will resume or continue on the 19th. And as far as the survey, we do want to make sure every family knows they do have a choice. You can choose to continue with distance learning, or you can choose to return on campus in our hybrid model. And once we get back the results from the survey, we will then take into account those results and the information that each of you provide to develop our learning teams. So again, there's learning team 1, learning team 2, keeping in mind trying to prioritize siblings being on the same team for transportation issues for families, being able to plan for those that want hybrid or DL only, and then also how we will balance our classes and make it easy for teachers to know which students are on which team, so we can obviously take attendance and know exactly who is coming when. So that will we will work on that as soon as we get the results in from the survey. So next steps, the survey is going to go out tomorrow. Feel free, this webinar again, this will be included in the survey as well as some of our other materials. This presentation is a PDF, and it is included on the survey as well. So you can again refer to the survey as you're answering. You can refer to the presentation as you're completing the survey. You'll have a week and 2 days to complete the survey by March 12th. We will then take that information and reach out to any families who did not respond so we can get an answer from as many families as possible. And then we will form those learning teams. Then we will share out with families what that looks like. Our goal is to not change any students' classes, any students' teachers, just figuring out which students come on which days. So we're not blowing up the schedule. We're not going to rerun the schedule where you have a new 6 classes and different people. We're going to try to keep it the same as best we can. We'll share that out, and then we'll communicate with you as we move forward. And we do want to make sure that you fill out a survey for each of your secondary students. That's going to be important, whether you have a student at junior high or high school, or at Mary Collins, or at PAX, or at Alt Ed. We do want to make sure that you fill out the survey. And before we get into answering some of the Q&As, I do also want to share for PAX students, for Mary Collins middle grade students, for our Alt Ed sites, their hybrid schedules are similar yet slightly different than this main plan. This main plan is for most of the comprehensive schools, but there are definitely some similarities between our plans. So more information will be coming from each of those schools on exactly what their hybrid looks like. So before you jump in and complete the survey first thing tomorrow, you want to make sure that you receive that information from your school so that you know what you're choosing. And then I also wanted to thank, there's a lot of work that's been put in behind the scenes. There were many committee meetings, and I know not everyone knows exactly what went on in those meetings, and not everything was communicated out, but a lot of thoughtful, meaningful work went into designing a plan that not only met the guidance, but was as educationally sound as possible. But even with that, right, there are some limitations. We are in a pandemic. There are some things that we just can't do. The 3.5 weeks of A days and 3.5 weeks of B days does present some problems. It does present some learning continuity issues between, you've been having all 6 classes all year, and then you're going to go 3.5 weeks with only 3 of them and not the other 3, and then switch. So it's not perfect, but it does, meet the guidance, and it is the best plan we were able to put together. And so I just wanted to thank the teachers who participated and the admin who participated on that committee and all the great work they did. So now I'm going to stop sharing And then Jason and I will jump into.
So Cliff, I can keep answering. So hopefully people are watching the chat. I can keep answering questions. We won't get to all of them because you ask questions quicker than we can answer them. But we are trying. Cliff, I've been marking the ones that we want you to answer live as answer live. If you just start at the top, and I'll keep jamming down and answering the ones that I can answer with text. One of the big ones on the top was a lot of questions about AP.
Yeah, so I just kind of talked about that. So yes, students who are taking AP classes, this will be a challenge, right? Depending on when you have your AP classes, if you have them in that first chunk on the A days, your class will continue right up until the AP testing. If you have AP classes that are on B days, there's going to be a gap for 3.5 weeks before you have the class. And the testing for AP is a little different this year. There are 3 different windows, and depending on depending on the subject you're in, the test is happening in different windows. Some tests are happening out after the school year. So we do understand that will be different. We have been brainstorming ways to support our students during those 3.5 weeks when they don't have an AP class. We're also looking at how to better support students in special ed who for one of those periods of time do not have access to some of their special ed supports, as well as students in ELD who may not have ELD for 3.5 weeks, whether it's the A days or the B days. So there's still some support work that needs to be done, but we are aware of that, and we're going to try to support our students as best we can. So quite a few about that. So I just mentioned the study skills. Can students stay on campus during academic time? Great question. And the answer is no. So at the end of the 3 periods in the morning, all students have to leave campus. Academic time, office hours time will be virtual. We do have to keep our stable groups separate. So for now, that's going to continue in a virtual way. Do you actually fill out the health survey electronically? Yes, it's a module. It's a little survey that'll come from Parent Square every morning with a list of COVID-19 symptoms and a question about exposure. And you will complete it and sign it electronically, and we receive it. So it is something you do electronically. So you can do it on your phone, you can do it on a computer, but it is something that will happen every day. Are face shields allowed? Face shields are allowed, but they're not allowed in place of a mask. So a student would still have to wear a mask if they're wearing a face shield. In certain situations, there are medical exemptions, but in most cases, one of the alternate ways to mask up are face shields with drapes. So there's a drape at the bottom of the shield that prevents the air from just flowing out underneath the mask or underneath the face shield. Those are the only ones that the California Department of Public Health allows to be worn without a mask. So it's either mask and shield, or face shield with drapes. But there are some medical requirements to have some of those alternates. Will there be some kind of orientation for current freshmen since they really didn't get one in the summer? That's a great question. I can't answer that specifically, but I do know each of our sites are thinking about what exactly they're going to do, how they're going to handle that. I know some of them are thinking about taking some time those first couple days when students come to campus to do a type of a orientation, so students can get familiar with the campus, just like I mentioned earlier, especially for freshmen or new students or 7th graders who've never been on a site this year or never been to their new school. What if you don't have 3 classes a day? Where would the student go during the missed class? So yeah, in some cases, there may be juniors or seniors who don't have a full schedule, or may have, a student might have a first and a third and not a second. That's a great question. We haven't really talked about a holding place. So we'll have to get back on specifics there. It might depend on the student situation, but there may be a place that we can house some of those students, again, limited to the capacity of 6 feet distancing. So those we'll have to figure out. How does PE work? Great question. So PE follows a lot of the same guidance as the youth sports and athletics guidance that's come out. So we will be doing PE to the degree we can. Obviously, students have to wear a mask, have to be socially distant. Um, some of our schools have, exercise equipment, bikes, things like that. A lot of our PE is going to be done outdoors to the best that we can, and obviously pending weather. Again, we have stable group limitations, right, where we're not mixing classes, and we have capacity limitations based off 6 feet minimum space. So we will, do PE as best we can under the guidance that we have, but we are planning to have PE. Can I explain how siblings attend together? So, yeah, so we will be looking at when we get the results from the survey. Our system tells us how many, if students have siblings, and if so, where they're at. So we'll be able to tell, and our goal will be to put siblings on the same learning team, so that if you had a student in 8th grade and a high schooler, if they're both on learning team 1, that means they both come on Mondays and Thursdays. If they're on team 2, they would both come on Tuesdays and Fridays. So that's what we were talking about. We're trying to make sure that we align those as best we can. Yeah, so question about this schedule not working for everyone, depending on transportation and parents working. We do understand that, and in cases like that, that may be a decision the family has to make, that distance learning may be the better option, if there is inconsistent transportation, or not, or they don't have the ability to come to school on those 2 days. Then maybe distance learning is the only option for families in that situation. Okay, I mentioned that. Good question. If students do not follow rules, so obviously we will be monitoring correct social distancing, mask wearing, and in essence, right, there will be reminders if students consistently, the mask falls down off their nose, on their face. If we have to consistently remind students and it becomes an issue, then there will be a point where students will be asked to stay home and join the distance learning only group and not come on campus. So obviously it's not going to be one and done. There will be, a process and, obviously reminders, but if students are blatantly going to disregard the safety rules, then they will have to participate in distance learning only. Will students be required to get a COVID test prior to returning to on-campus learning? Great question. When we publish the secondary COVID safety plans, you'll be able to see more details on how that works. But it depends. It depends if the student is COVID positive. So if the student is COVID positive and exhibiting symptoms, there's a certain number of days they have to isolate and quarantine at home. Bringing a negative test is one way, or not having had a fever or symptoms for a certain number of days is another way. But there will be more details in the COVID safety plans on what that looks like. Another one about freshman orientation. Another one about orientation. That's a popular one. Oh, great question. How many students are permitted in a class? Y esta pregunta fue en español. So we are limited to 6 feet of social distancing. That's the standard. Technically, you could have student desks closer than that, but no closer than 4 feet. If that were the case, we have to include other mitigating factors like added ventilation and/or barriers like plexiglass. But we're going to stick with the 6-foot standard. So it depends on each room. Most rooms probably, for example, the room I showed you was a Petaluma High classroom. I don't remember which wing it's in. I think it was the C wing. But we were able to fit 15 in there, right? The way that configuration was set up. So we're assuming anywhere between, 10 to 15. It kind of depends on the space. Food eating protocols. So there are some situations in some of our special ed programs where students do have snacks, or students who bring their own snacks. So There is no eating in the classrooms. The food that is provided at school will be grab and go to be eaten at home. But during passing time, if students are snacking, clearly they can remove their mask to eat or drink briefly, but if they're not eating or drinking, they need to have the mask placed over their face, over their mouth and nose.
Did you see that question in Spanish right there?
Yeah, I answered that one.
Okay, I'll mark it as done.
Okay, it keeps jumping up on me. Okay, I did that. I don't know what this question is. So yeah, after school, all students leave campus. So at 12:15, you can grab a lunch and breakfast and leave campus. And depending on your third period class or your sixth period class, you will leave a certain way, out a certain path to a certain exit. Obviously, for those participating in extracurricular activities or athletics later in the afternoon, you can return to campus at that time. When does the school day begin and end? So first period starts at 8:45, first or fourth, depending on if we're on an A day or B day. And it ends at 12:15. There are 3 60-minute classes with 15-minute passing periods. And zero period, as we've developed it so far, was from 7:15 to 8:15. If that changes, we will let you know. So they're all 60-minute classes. 8:45 is the start time, same exact schedule as we have now in distance learning, 8:45 to 12:15. Our teacher is going to be able to provide all the necessary lesson as per state regulation. Great question. So what happens with that is clearly for those 3.5 weeks of A days and B days, things are truncated, things are sped up a little bit. You're having more content in a more concentrated timeline. But as far as providing the necessary lessons, so all of our teachers, when this year started, had to look at their curriculum and winnow down to the essential standards, the essential lessons, and make sure that we covered those topics and taught those topics. There are fewer instructional minutes this year than normal, right? Normally we have 64,800 minutes for secondary students. This year we have, many thousands less because of the way this learning was set up by the state and the instructional minutes we have. So it doesn't look like normal. Students in most cases will not be able to have access to all of the teaching and learning they would have years prior. So it's sped up, it's accelerated, it's truncated. Please define congregate. Great question. Yeah, I mean, briefly stopping and talking to a friend, keeping your 6 feet distance, that's not an issue. I'm talking about if you look at a typical secondary school, you have groups of, anywhere from, I don't know, 6 to 20 kids all kind of congregating in a close space all together, right? Things like that are going to be discouraged. We're going to ask kids to kind of break up. Clearly, the more you space out, the more people could technically be involved. We had a staff meeting the other day at the district office, and we all spread out in the parking lot and formed this giant amoeba. We're able to still have a conversation, but we safely distance from each other. AP exams been taken. Yes, they have. Unfortunately, with the limitations on the guidance, there's really no great way to handle that. We can only have 3 classes at a time. And our AP classes are all over our schedule. There's no great way to put the AP classes first, unfortunately. Will students be allowed to do group work? It would look different. Sure, they can. Some of it might be virtually. It might be through our Google Suite, our Google Docs, our slideshow presentations, things like that. They're not supposed to, congregate closer than 6 feet. So obviously that limits group work. So in a classroom that may look like just a few students within a 6-foot radius, all spread out, that might be 3 or 4 students that kind of turn and work with each other for a small amount of time. But Probably less, much less than normal, and definitely not close together. There was a question about transportation. So we are working with Petaluma City Transportation on what our schedule looks like, so that they can support with routes that that serve our schools during the times that students will be coming and leaving. So I don't know an exact schedule right now, but I do know they've been reaching out to us for our schedule to be able to set up routes that support families who either don't have transportation or don't have consistent transportation. So if Petaluma City Bus is near your neighborhood, near your home, that's something you want to look to. They will be adding and changing some routes to help out our schools. It is expected for us to return in the fall. That's the plan. We are planning to come back in the fall, hopefully back to normal. It all depends on how the pandemic plays out and what happens with the guidance. And what tier we're in by then. But the board at the last meeting set out the goal to be able to come back in the fall to regular full in-person learning. So we're hoping that's what we can do. That's what we're planning for. Yes, siblings from 2 different secondary schools. Yes, we're going to try to get them onto the same learning team. Okay. Yes, more concerns about AP. It is not ideal. Oh, great question. Yes, we will be providing masks. Obviously, we would encourage families to send students with an appropriate mask. For those that don't, there will be masks in each classroom. There's extra masks. There's hand sanitizer in every classroom. There are wipes. But yes, we do have masks. We talked about the snacking, yes. So great question. If a student chooses distance learning only, they follow this exact schedule, but from home. So they would get online every day, the same time they are now, for first, for second, for third, for 3.5 weeks. And then we're switch, and then they get online every day as we do now for 4, 5, and 6 for the last 3.5 weeks. So distance learning, the schedule is exactly the same, but they are going to follow the same A days and B days as the hybrid. So great question. Are the DL students basically watching the in-room class students? That may look different depending on each teacher. So clearly that's something that is a concern for both students, parents, teachers. Just exactly what will it look like to teach to a group in person and other groups at home? So we're working with our technology folks and sharing with teachers different ways that can be handled. There may be some teachers that choose to be as interactive as possible to both the students in person and at home. There may be situations where, yeah, it's more of a camera into the room to what the teacher's doing. Or it may be more like a Zoom where the teacher puts the Zoom up on the screen so the students in class can see the students at home. So there's several ways to handle it, but it'll depend on how comfortable the teacher is with handling that, because it is difficult to not only handle a group in person, but then also students at home at the same time. So again, with so many students coming on campus, how we make sure the protocols are followed. So we're going to continue to teach these protocols to families, to teach them to students, to teach them to staff. We're going to have staff prepared to enforce our protocols. We're going to use our campus supervisors at our secondary schools to help enforce our protocols, our admin. It is going to be part of our job to keep reinforcing and enforcing these protocols. Your students leave campus at 12:15 or 1. So technically they get out of their last class at 12:15. And depending on whether or not they grab lunch, that may be a few minutes later, but it's 12:15, not 1 o'clock. They don't stay on campus through 1 o'clock. That's just the lunch, period where teachers are also getting their lunch, and then office hours, academic time starts at 1. So great question. Students will not be remaining on campus during lunchtime. They will be going home. Great question. Some questions about what if a student does test positive. So there are protocols, again, these will be in the COVID safety plans, on what happens if a student's positive, what happens if multiple students are positive, what if a teacher's positive. If more than 5% of a class, for example, tests positive, that's considered an outbreak, and that class would quarantine at home. So they would stay home and participate in distance learning. So would the teacher. We would contact trace where those students all went and who they had close contacts with. So in a case like that, that may involve several classes, several stable groups being quarantined at home for the appropriate amount of time. If a school has more than 5% of the students and or staff test positive, the whole school shuts down and goes into distance learning. So we've been lucky to date. None of the distance learning support centers we've had open have had an outbreak. There have been positive cases, but there's been no clear transmission of cases at school to other students or staff. And that's the whole point of these protocols, is to minimize that risk. What if people don't follow masks? Okay, I answered that one earlier. Lots of questions about study skills, and ELD kind of falls in the same realm as well as AP. What happens if your students don't have those services for one of those 3.5 week periods? So that's something our group still needs to iron out. When we met yesterday, those were a few of the things we identified that we need to shore up. That may look like some type of contact, some type of support on those off weeks. It may be contact in academic time, office hours for support. But it is something we need to address so that students aren't just left without their services and out their support for those weeks where they don't have those classes. Will the classrooms be cleaned in between classes? So no, the classrooms are not sanitized or deep cleaned in between periods. So that electrostatic sprayer that you saw, that happens once a day in the evening after the end of the day. The cleaning guidance and protocols from the CDC, as well as the CDPH and the county, those have changed a lot as the data's come in and we've learned, really how COVID transmits. And while clearly we still need to be wary of high touch surfaces, make sure we clean those frequently. Fully sanitizing with the sprayer, every period, every day is not recommended. So that's something we took off, and that was something we had on our plans originally, but that would have required at least probably a 45-minute space in between classes to fully electrostatically spray an entire secondary campus and let it dry and get out of the air. So you can imagine what to do with secondary students for 45 minutes following these protocols became, not a realistic plan, in addition to the cleaning protocols changing. So is it possible for 0 period kids to Zoom at school from their first period classroom? No, I mean, our teachers, most of our teachers, right, are not necessarily at school for 0 period unless they're teaching 0 period. So there may not be a staff member there at 7:15 to even house them. We did think about what that could look like if kids came and Zoomed from campus, but that doesn't work as far as we're concerned. What if they have an off period? That's another one we're gonna have to figure out. If you have an off period at the end of your schedule, either 3rd or 6th, clearly you leave campus early. If it's in the middle of your day, we're going to have to figure out the best plan for students, especially depending on how many there are. If it's at the start of the day, you would come right before your second class of the day. You wouldn't come at 8:15. Some classes such as drama and PE often require students to work close together. How will this work? So again, the guidance is that we're remaining at least 6 feet distant as best we can to the best extent possible. Will there be times when students are closer than that for short periods of time? Yes. We have a lot of our sports teams back practicing now. And while they do their best to maintain social distance, there are certain sports where clearly for brief moments, you may be closer than that. So, will that be allowed? Yes, but it will be, minimal and definitely not like normal, not like before. How is the board helping to get their teachers vaccinated? Well, the board really doesn't have a say in this. The Solano County Office of Education was put in charge of vaccinating all educators. They were given an allotment of vaccines from the county, and they have a process on dividing up educators in the county and figuring out when they get vaccinated. The governor, as you may be aware, did a certain percentage of vaccines for teachers. And so those are coming to counties in addition to the ones we already have. And there are health providers that are now getting in the game, like Kaiser and others. So there are opportunities that are coming up outside of what SCO is doing. And I know our teachers, we've been sharing that information with them. If you can get it through your local health provider before you can get it from SCO, go ahead, more power to you. So we've clearly been, working with the county and sharing our, concerns about the fact that Petaluma is in one of the last groups. And due to supply issues and other issues, the plan that SCO did set up has been bumped a few times. Every time that gets bumped, our group gets bumped another week. So it's something I know I've seen, community members, urge county supervisors and others to help prioritize teachers, educators. So I know folks are doing the best they can to get those opportunities for our teachers. Petaluma Transit, yes, I mentioned that earlier. Can you change your mind after a week or two? Great question. We know there's probably going to be some families who either choose distance learning only, who may want to come onto campus, or vice versa. Will there be those opportunities? Sure, there will be, but we can't have a situation where families and students are just coming and going and changing every few days or every week. Especially, this isn't an opportunity where students should be. I don't feel like coming on Monday for learning team 1. I'll show up on Thursday. I'm just going to distance learn home on Monday. If a student was sick or had symptoms, okay, that's one thing, but students should be on campus when their learning team was on campus, if that's what they chose. What are the use for rules using restrooms? Great question. There are certain protocols for this. So each of our bathrooms will have a capacity. So depending on how many students and how many people can be in a restroom, distance at least 6 feet, there's going to be a capacity. And when students arrive at the restrooms, they're going to need to make sure that the bathroom is not over capacity. So bathrooms will have some type of visual sign that says what capacity is. Students will have to make sure there's not already that many people in there. If so, they need to wait outside, and we will have signage on the ground, where students can wait socially distanced. Once a student exits, then they can enter. So it's going to have to be learning, when you come to a restroom, to make sure it's not already over capacity. Let's see. My questions keep getting pushed up. Okay, there was restrooms. If you are sick and can't be in person, will they be absent or be able to Zoom? You could jump on the Zoom. You would still need to call the attendance office and report your illness, but yes, you could jump on the Zoom, so you're not missing any instruction. Um, Question about tests, like exams, quizzes, how will they be administered? That'll depend on each teacher. I'm sure many of them will love the opportunity to assess students in person again. Um, and because we have, um, some students in distance learning only, clearly those students will have opportunities to take their exams via distance learning. They're not going to have to come on campus to take their test, but obviously that'll depend on each teacher. Kids at different schools. So I've answered this one a couple of times. Can you change your choice? Public bus, we talked about that. Yeah, great question. If the majority want to go back in person, where'd that question go? Will there be enough space in the classrooms to allow 6 feet apart? So at a typical secondary classroom, 15 to 16 would be pushing it. Our class size for secondary is 32. So if we did have that situation, we would have to make sure that our classrooms actually can fit that many. Judging by our elementary results, I don't think we're going to be in that situation where everyone chooses to come back. Our elementary results were 75% of the families did want to come back for hybrid, 25 wanted to remain in distance learning. So for secondary, I have no idea what those results will be, but I doubt it will be 100%. Can you redo the survey if we change your minds? Well, if you change your mind in the next week and 2 days, you could submit another one. When we go through, we will be looking for duplicates. So we'll have the sites reach out to figure out which one of those 2 that you submitted is the one you prefer. Another one about orientation. Yes, so students are in the same 6 classes. They will be in the same 6 classes that they are now. Just some of them will come on campus on some days, some will come on other days, and some will stay in distance learning, but it's the same 6 classes with the same classmates as they have now. Teachers are teaching to students in the classroom and to students on Zoom at the same time. Yes. So our working group, we looked at a few different options. We looked at schedules that included time for in-person only, and then time later in the day for at home only, where teachers would teach their lesson twice, once in person, once on Zoom to the students at home. And where we ended up as a group, 95.8% of us, when we kind of narrowed down, preferred to go with the simultaneous schedule, to do everything once rather than twice, and figure out how to do the simultaneous as best we can. So that is the plan. So if a student is in group 1, will students not have B days at all? Whether you're in learning team 1 or learning team 2 or distance learning only, no one has B days for the first 3.5 weeks. From April 19th to May 11th, everyone has A day classes, 1st through 3rd. And then once we hit May 12th through June 4th, everyone has B days, 4th through 6th. Is academic time all DL? Yes, for now, yes. Can a student mix, take some on campus, some at home? No, you're committing to one or the other. Can students meet with teachers, counselors in person during office hours? So counselors, this question actually came up yesterday from one of our counselors. So if your stable group, if your learning team is on campus on a certain day, will there be opportunities to schedule appointments, possibly to see your counselor while you're on campus? That is something we could look into. If it's your off day. If it's learning team 1 on campus and you're learning team 2, no, because we don't want to mix those stable groups. But for now, we're trying to prevent students staying on campus for the academic time. That may be something we open up later, but we don't want kids remaining on campus that entire time. If a student chooses to stay distance learning, how will they meet their teacher? Well, their teacher will open up a Zoom just like they do now, and connect with the students at home through the Zoom. Can you do in-person for A days and DL for B days? We're not putting that option out there. We're asking families to commit to one or the other for the full 7 weeks. How many students will be in each room? Answer that. Do you have any benchmarks for teaching the way this will be? I'm not sure what that question is. So yes, so A days for 3.5 weeks starting April 19th. And then we switch and go B days only for 3.5 weeks. Do students need to bring their own water bottles? Yes. All of the drinking fountains on campus will be turned off if they haven't already. There will be water bottle filling stations. So if you bring your own water bottle, you can bring your own water, you can refill it. But one of the protocols is to turn off the drinking fountain, so we don't have multiple students touching, using, putting their mouth on the same drinking fountain bubbler. Another question about what if they refuse. We've talked about discipline. This schedule, hold on, where'd it go? Did you answer that one? You must have, it disappeared.
I must have.
Oh, great question. Will students be getting assignments for both A and B during the alternating days? No. So during the first 3.5 weeks, those are all A days. Periods 4, 5, and 6 will not be assigning homework or work for those first 3.5 weeks. And then same happens the last 3.5. First, second, and third will be over on May 11th. And there won't be any additional work over those next 3.5 weeks. 2 separate grading periods for these classes. I talked about buses a little bit earlier. There is transportation for special ed, like we've always provided. And we have talked to Petaluma Transit about our schedules. So I know they're going to be adjusting their routes. So I would say refer to Petaluma Transit for any updates there. Bathrooms, I mentioned that again. Yes, they're open, obviously, depending on capacity. What has been communicated to students about this schedule? Nothing. This webinar. There's been some, there's clearly been some speculation and rumors and maybe even some leaks out there. But up until today, our plan has been constantly changing following the guidance. So as of yesterday, we had settled on a different version of this schedule. And then this morning, we learned on a webinar hosted by the county and county public health that our schedule did not meet the guidance. So we had to pivot and go back to our prior option, which is this schedule. If students stay home, will they still have to go 3 A day weeks and 3 B day weeks? Yes. Yes. Are you not getting my questions? I don't see any other questions from that person. Let me see here. Oh, sorry. I answered the study skills question a number of times. So we are still trying to figure out how to support students who don't have study skills the 3.5 weeks that they don't have that class. So I don't have a solid, answer on what exactly the plan is, but that is something we are aware of and will be addressing. Students stay on campus for academic time? No. Okay, where am I at? Buses. What exactly does this mean for senior projects? That's a great question. I don't know. I would say, refer to your school on exactly how that's going to be handled. Oh, and then has this been sent out to kids? No. I mean, this is it. This is the schedule. This is the live first time folks are hearing it publicly. So we will share it out with everyone via email tomorrow. Again, options to choose their choice once it's began. Yes, but to a degree. We don't want folks changing every week. Are students that have off periods allowed to leave campus after they complete their previous classes? If they don't have any more classes, of course. Of course, they don't need to stay on campus. How will schools handle students who are taking other classes, such as those from the SRJC, shortly after or now during school time? I'm a little confused about that. Our school day technically is 8:45 to 3 o'clock. And it has been this entire time in distance learning. So just like students who have jobs, they shouldn't technically be working until after the school day. They should be available. So if a student has an SRJC class that encroaches upon that time, they're going to have to figure that out, especially if they have a class that creeps into the actual class periods, which go until 12:15. That is an issue. Will students have the option to take their AP tests at home? It depends. Long story short, AP has 3 testing windows this year. The first window is for in-person tests, and all of them are offered. Window 2 is not all of the tests are offered, and there are options to take it in person or online. Window 3, same thing. Not all the tests are offered, but there are options. So it depends. I know our world languages tests, are going to use one of the windows, and I know there are other subjects where their window is chosen for them, and some of those windows are after the school year, as I mentioned, all the way up until June 10th. So, so if you don't know exactly when that window is, please contact your AP coordinator at your high school. I know they're well versed in the different windows, and that is something they do have to, figure out each family's preference if there is an option. So I would say check with your AP coordinator. Again, another question about positive test in person. Where'd that one go?
We answered that earlier.
Okay, sorry. They disappear. I don't know what to do.
I'm disappearing if we've already answered them. So everyone, we know you have a lot of questions. We actually have answered about over 200 questions. We have 537 to go, and we have 8 minutes left in this, so we won't get to them all, but there is a question and answer session tomorrow night as well.
So another question, will the teachers just be filmed over Zoom so students who aren't there can do a class with those who are there on campus? I mean, in essence, yes. Teachers will Zoom from the classroom. So the students who are at home, because every day students are required to have live interaction. So just because it's not your day to be on campus doesn't mean it's a day off. You do need to jump on your 3 Zooms and participate in your class. Okay, question about, I made a comment about make sure you get that from school. So if you are a PAC student, Mary Collins middle grade student, or at one of our alt ed schools, wait to take the survey until you hear from the school on exactly what their schedule looks like. They're very similar, slightly different. So if, I would just say wait until you get that information in the next couple of days before you jump on and answer the survey, just so you know exactly how they're handling the hybrid, because it is we have some programs that are slightly different, that are handling this a little different. Yeah, still quite a few questions that we've answered about that. Can you go back and forth? Will you tell us how many teachers will not be returning to campus this year? I don't know that number right now. I know HR has been working with teachers on who will and won't return. Our plan is to try and fill as many of those positions as we can. For secondary, as you can imagine, things get a little more complicated because of credentialing. We have subject-specific credentials, subject-specific teachers. So it's not like an elementary teacher who teaches all the subjects who may be able to just do distance learning. It becomes a lot more complicated at secondary to try to handle all that. But I don't know exactly right now that number. Will students that are in class have to log on to the Zoom as well, or just the teacher? Great question. So students who are in class, one of the things we're going to share with teachers is not having each student in class jump on the Zoom. If you've ever been in the same room with someone on the same Zoom, you get audio, cross-channeling, echo, things get a little haywire, a little crazy. So the students who are there in person don't need to jump on the Zoom. And that potentially could hog the bandwidth at our schools. We did upgrade our bandwidth, but it can bottleneck at the wireless access point in the classroom. So they may still be on their Chromebook. They may still be on, their Google Doc or the textbook or the lesson or the website. But yeah, we don't need 15 people Zooming in the same Zoom in the same room. Let's see. What happens if a parent doesn't complete the wellness check prior to school starting? So there will be, again, like I said, there's a place on each campus where you can go and get screened. But it is a bit on the honor system. You would show up if you forgot to do the screening at home, you would have to go do the screening. Our administrators will have access on a daily basis to see which students did and did not complete the screening, and will be responding. So if that becomes an issue, again, if we've got students who for multiple days are persistently not completing that, then they may be transitioned into distance learning only, because that is something that has to be done. While general masks are 1 to 2 layered, what does 3 layered imply? So I didn't say layered, I said, what did I say?
I might have put 3 layer in the chat.
Okay, we're talking about ply.
3 ply, yeah.
So 2 or 3 ply, they have to be 2 or 3 ply greater. The neck gaiters are not, that's just 1 ply, right, for the most part. And those aren't allowed. Neither are bandanas. So you're looking for 2 or 3 ply surgical masks or cloth masks. If people are in extracurriculars like band or sports, they're automatically exposed to students who are not in their team. That is true. And that is allowed. So you can be part of 4 stable groups, 3 academic, 1 extracurricular. Clearly, best case scenario would be 1 stable group, 1 class at a time. That's the best for safety. Probably not the best academically, probably not the best social emotionally. Students would literally be taking the rest of the semester in 1 week and switching to another class and finishing. And that was not a plan we felt great about, so we didn't go there. So we're kind of right at the limit of the guidance as far as how many stable groups a student can belong to. But that is correct. They would be part of 4 groups. And yes, potentially mixing from kids from another day. That's true. Will we be posting these questions? We'll definitely be posting our answers. Will there be a distance learning option next year? Way too early to tell. The only reason distance learning is an option right now is based on the Senate bills and the guidance so far. If that goes away and we're back to normal school, then The only distance learning option we have is our independent study high school, Valley Oaks. So that would still be an option. How will band work? Great question. So there is specific guidance about band and instruments, and there are ways to mitigate. We were talking today with one of our band teachers who teaches one of his band classes in 0 period. So we were talking about ways to make that work. I don't know how many families and parents want their kids, using the tuba or the trumpet at 7:15 at home. So we've talked about other ways to handle that, potentially having some of that 0 period music time. Maybe that's something that gets done in academic time later in the day. But I would say, more information will be coming about how band, choir, things like that work.
Cliff, can I jump in? Somebody made a comment that we were dismissing some of their questions. The questions that we were dismissing were ones that we thought we had already answered at least once or maybe a couple of times, either through the chat or Cliff answering through the presentation or the Q&A. So if your question was dismissed, we are going to share this whole presentation with you tomorrow. So you should have a chance to go back and see that. And if you still feel your question isn't answered, then you can reach out and let us know your question.
So this question's come up a couple times. Will students need to wear PE uniforms? So, to be honest, we have not spoken to our secondary sites and PE teachers about this yet. Is it allowed? Sure. Can we use PE locker rooms? Yes. Do we have to follow distancing protocols and cleaning protocols? Yes. So if we do use uniforms and use the locker rooms, we will plan appropriately. So I would say more info needs to come out on that specifically. But we can hold PE following the guidance to the best of our ability. Man, I unplugged that and it's still beeping. It's got a battery backup, darn it. Still a lot of that same question. Can we switch? Not consistently. If there's some buyer's remorse, there might be an opportunity to switch, but we do need to commit. Will the teachers be present on campus? Yes. Those that are coming back will be present on campus. Do students have to take the breakfast or lunch if they don't want it? No. Will you know what team you're on before April 19th? Yes. Yes. Well before April 19th. Can you request to have your kids on different teams? Sure. Yeah. If that's your situation, send me an email, Cliff DeGraw. You can find it on the website, cdegraw@petk12.org. Yes, I don't have a spot for that in the survey, but that is something we could entertain. Is there any 8th grade graduation plan? Not really part of our discussion here, but talks about graduations and how that can and can't be handled are currently under discussion, so more to come. Are the AP tests going to be in person only? No, not necessarily. Depends on the test. Depends on the subject. Will the student be on Zoom? Will class with headphones? So no, in the classroom, they'll just listen to the teacher. Will I please address not vaccinating teachers? I can't really address that. That was a board decision with the criteria.
Cliff, that came up in the chat. Somebody was asking, will we require teachers to vaccinate? And I told them we can't mandate anyone to be vaccinated. We're going to make sure that we offer the vaccination to all of our staff.
Right. That doesn't mean we don't want them to have access to the vaccine and be fully vaccinated. HR shared out last week some information we got about signing up for vaccinations through other sources and not waiting for the county. So, um, we're going to keep sharing out those options and try to get as many of our folks vaccinated as possible. But it is not required and it is not mandated. And it's because of HIPAA, policies and regulations. We won't even know. We don't have a list of who has and hasn't been vaccinated. That's clearly something families won't know either. Can students choose not to come to school for non-medical reasons? So the same excused absence reasons apply in distance learning as they do in hybrid. So if there's an excused reason, sure. If there's an unexcused reason, it would be marked as unexcused absence. But if it's a non-medical issue and there's, this is something, maybe distance learning is the better option if it's going to be a consistent thing. Is that a Grateful Dead poster on your wall, Mr. Sutter? Yes, it is. Who will teach the distance learning classes? The same teachers. The same teachers your students have now, if they're coming back, will be the ones teaching them in distance learning. If enough students stay remote, is there a possibility that kids who opt in person could be there 4 days? Remote possibility, sure. I mean, let's say the results come back and it's 15% want to come back in person, 85 want to remain in distance learning. That could change our plan. Yeah. I doubt it, but that could change the plan. Again, another opposite schedule, distance learning thing, email me because I'm going to be the one going through the results. I think we have a medical professional asking a lot of these questions. Will families that are not completing the daily wellness checks, how will that be handled? Yes, I mentioned earlier, we're going to be monitoring that on a daily basis. And if it's a persistent issue, they're going to be distance learning only. Great question. What if Sonoma County stays in the purple? If we stay in the purple, we continue as is in distance learning and we don't transition to hybrid. So the week of April 19th would continue like it is now. Secondary ELD and SDC special ed would still be able to come onto campus for support because that can happen in the purple. But we would just continue with distance learning. We wouldn't transition into this hybrid schedule. When do you estimate we will find out our student schedule so we can plan for future work schedules? So we'll get the results on the 12th. We'll look at them right away that next week. So the week of, what is it, the 15th? We're going to be hunting down everyone who didn't respond so we can get answers. So our goal would be before spring break, we could have that information for everybody. At the latest, it would be the week of the 12th, but we're hoping we can get that to you before spring break. If the governor offers more funding to open by the end of March, might you bring forward the dates? Well, the governor is offering more funding and it's spliced out in phases. So TK through 2, if they come back by April 1, you can be eligible for the funding. Granted, we're going to be on spring break starting March 29th. So I don't know exactly how that works because technically we will be coming back elementary the second we get done with spring break if we're, or no, we are, but we don't have to be in the red for that. So I don't know exactly how that funding works, but I don't think the dates are going to be moved forward. No, sports practices will still be after the school day, after 3 o'clock, not right after the classes in the morning. Will golf carts still be used at Casa Grande? I don't see why not. As long as they're not transporting students and they're keeping socially distant, they may not be able to have 2 employees per cart, but I don't see a reason why the cart won't be used. What are the benefits we're hoping to achieve for returning to a campus on a hybrid schedule? Well, I would say one of those is one, probably a better connection to your teacher and classmates. I mean, for all the things that Zoom and remote learning can do, there's many things that it can't. I know there are social needs students have that can't be satisfied via remote learning. I know academic integrity is a lot easier to monitor in person. I know teaching lessons to students who you can actually see and monitor um, is more effective. And general mental health, well-being. I think students are starving for some normalcy to be able to see classmates again and others. A lot of our students have been isolated and don't have much contact. So I would say for those reasons, plus probably many others. I answered the positive. Yeah, if teachers choose not to come back and we have a replacement, sub or teacher or long-term sub, um, yes, that person would teach all of that teacher's classes. So if that was the scenario, your student would have a different teacher. Um, our teachers require the vaccine? No. Will auto and ag be able to use the shops? Yes. Will the windows be open? Yeah, that is one of the additional pieces. Obviously, pending the weather and pending your classroom, there are some classrooms that do not have windows that open. That is another mitigation strategy that can help increase the airflow. Can children ride their bikes to campus? Sure. Talk about the bathrooms. Talk about school bus. Talk about PE. We didn't talk about lockers. Um, so that depends on the site. So you'll have to figure out what your school's doing if they're going to assign lockers or not this year. Revisit the daily symptom check. I think I did since this question popped up. Oh, hey, we're over time. But let me see if there's any others I haven't answered. Bring their own water. Yep. Appropriate masks. Yep.
565 that you haven't answered.
Oh yeah. There's no food that's going to be served. Like snack bars won't be open. Our normal lunch offerings will not be provided. It's just the grab and go meals. Carpool. Ooh, good question. We're asked to minimize carpooling, and if there is carpooling, that it remain with the same stable group. So because we're dividing these in learning teams, if you're carpooling with someone on your um, learning team in your stable group, that would be great. If they're not in your stable group, the guidance we've been given is um, clearly you should be wearing your mask in the car on the way to school. You're trying to minimize that contact, that exposure with someone in a different stable group. But carpools are discouraged, but understandably, um, there's going to be some families and situations where there's no way to avoid that. Bathrooms you open, yes. You're allowed to drink water, yes. What time will students be allowed on campus? Great question. So when the schools put out their safety plans, they're going to have their little window of arrival and how we're trying to stagger arrivals. So you'll see the window, and that's when um, students can come on campus. So we shouldn't have students waiting out there for hours. Jumping on the rumor of desks facing the wall. A teacher showed my kid that was how the class was set up. I don't know about that. I haven't seen a classroom like that.
I think what has happened is that we have currently distance learning centers at our school. And so students are at the distance learning centers and we're under much stricter guidance and the case rate was much higher. Those situations where it wasn't actually a class, we were facing kids out and keeping them as separate as possible. But the class setup, I think that we're all envisioning is similar to the photos that Cliff showed you in the slide deck.
All right, well, I think this is probably a good time to call it. A lot of similar questions to the ones we've answered. We'll go through and see if there's others that we didn't get to.
But we do have question and answer tomorrow night for elementary and secondary
Yes.
families, 7 to 8:30.
Yes, that is true. Tomorrow evening at 7, district administration and I think site administration and others, we're gonna be holding just a general Q&A. So questions about anything, about our hybrid planning, about vaccinations, maybe some of these questions you didn't get answered tonight. So, please join us tomorrow for that. Thank you for your time and your patience. I know this was, a lot of information coming at you, and hopefully we answered the questions you had. Again, this is recorded. We will post it tomorrow with the survey that we send out in both English and Spanish. You'll have access to it. And please complete the survey by the 12th and email me specifically if you don't want your kids on the same learning team. And other than that, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mariana. Gracias. And have a great night. Be safe. Thank you.